All right, here we go. Ankush, welcome to our Business Builder Camp expert interview series. It's really good to be with you today and have this conversation.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Hey, so business builders, one of the things that I work to do in my community is share with you experts who I come across. And those experts in my world are quite varied. So there's business experts like mergers and acquisition experts who I meet, people who are experts in sales systems or accounting systems. But I also have a lot of people that I come across through my coaching instruction and work that I do. And I'm really happy to have Ankush with us today because he's somebody I met through a coach of mine, Steve Chandler, who many of you have heard me talk about Steve Chandler and refer to Steve's books and share those resources with you. And Ankush is joining us today from the countryside of England. And Ankush is a practitioner of a coaching methodology, maybe that's not the right word, methodology. He'll talk about that a little bit, called Three Principles. And so he's going to speak to us about how three principles have changed his life and how we might use it to look inside a little bit. Ankush is also the author of a book called Sweet Sharing. And this book is a piece that he's very vulnerable and talks about the journey that he's gone on internally. And I got a copy of that book when I was studying with Steve Chandler. And then I read it morning by morning, one chapter at a time. And it was very impactful and caused some fruitful journaling sessions for me. So I will talk about a few chapters in the book. And the other thing about Ankush is he runs two very successful groups, one group for high performing men on Facebook, and then also one for coaches who are pursuing these three principles in their work. He does some men's retreats, immersive experience, and also has a thriving one-on-one practice. So I'm so glad to bring you Ankush. So Ankush, maybe you just want to bridge off of that and how did I do on your intro?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. It's always really interesting to hear people introduce me and kind of our connections. And it's so interesting because I love that you've got a group or a community of people who are really interested in business because I'm really interested in that too. So whilst my background has been in coaching and that's kind of how we met and psychology, I think one of the things that what we both do is work with kind of real people, and so I'm excited to kind of share what it is that I've kind of been learning, how that applies to business, because I didn't used to see that, before. To me, it was like when I'd hear people talk about the mind or spirituality or meditation, or I don't know, some of that stuff, I'd put it in like one little box and like, that's kind of nice to know, but that's more of a personal journey. And then there's kind of real business stuff. So I'm glad that you've brought me on, and maybe we can talk about how to bridge those two things and make it really practical for people watching this.
Great. And I'm gonna share something with those of you who are watching. Ankush and I were speaking for a minute before we got started, and we were talking about how we were talking about how you moved to the country and there's some spiders there and you really love it, but the spiders were unanticipated kind of annoyance and that, yeah, I live in the country, so we've got lots of spiders. But we also talked very quickly about, you said it'll be interesting to talk to my community because I take people on hunting trips, or I've done that. We don't always do that, but we've done that. I have people too that are not interested in hunting or those things, but they are interested in alpine adventure and climbing and hiking and things like that. But we chatted about that for a moment, and I said I'm in my dad's house, so I turned the camera because my dad has these like a bear, a stuffed bear, and all these things. So we are in some sense like we're different, have different backgrounds, but yet I really I've learned so much from you, which speaks to me about how we can all learn from each other. So my guys, a lot of you come from a corporate world too. A lot of the people I'm working with are small business owners, kind of in the trenches and going, and and they're men, and a lot of times, they're men of American culture, where it's like we think about 5 steps to grow sales, or 5 steps to build our business, and we're pickup trucks and go go go. So can you talk a little bit about what are the 3 principles, and how does that apply to all of us, and maybe about the type of business owners that I'm talking about, small companies, right. Bootstrappers.
So you talked about it being a coaching methodology, and you said that maybe that's not right, and you were right about that.
Yeah.
So I like to explain it in this way, right? So I never considered this, but if you take the world of psychology, right, like as a science, as a field, right, I never really considered that the people in the field don't actually agree with each other, right? So if we look at the world of psychology, you'll have some people who are kind of brought up in the Freudian tradition, and they'll say, like, everything happens in your childhood and this is what it's all about. Then you'll get someone who's like a positive psychologist, and they'll say, well, actually, yeah, that might be important, but it's not so important. And all that matters is kind of, what you're doing going forward, and how optimism is more important than pessimism. You'll get other people who will say, well, actually, no, really, this is down to genetics, and about, how you view life is dependent on your genes. And there's a lot of basically different viewpoints, different theories. There really isn't a unified theory of psychology. Whereas if you look at other sciences, yes, there can be some disagreement about things, but generally people agree. Like, you don't tend to get a lot of people who say the periodic table is wrong in chemistry.
Right.
Right. You don't tend to get people who say, gravity doesn't exist. Right. It's actually magical stardust or something. Right. Like, people tend to agree. And in psychology, that's not the case. There's no agreed upon paradigm. And there was a guy called William James, who was known as kind of the godfather of psychology. And he said, if we understand the fundamental principles of psychology, it will be the greatest discovery since fire. Right? And I had never considered any of this stuff. Why would I? Most people don't. And so there was a chap in the 70s off the west coast of Canada who basically had an enlightenment experience, right? And we hear about other people like that. Maybe, I don't know if your community know people like Byron Katie or Eckhart Tolle. There are these people who seem to have some kind of spontaneous enlightenment experience, right? So this guy did. But what was really interesting about him is, right, he was kind of doing the enlightened man thing, whatever, but a psychologist went to see him. And the psychologist went to see him, and Dr. Roger Mills, and he was like, everything that this guy was saying was the opposite of what Roger knew as a psychologist.
Right.
And he got, so they kind of had this, not debate, but they had this conversation. And this man, Sydney Banks, kind of said, well, you're wrong. And was just so confident with it, and was like, and are you really happy? And this guy went away and came back after a year and was like, my life has been completely changed. And not only that, but I'm helping my patients. And he started telling other psychologists. So then this other guy, Dr. George Pransky, went along, and he was like, no, this is all wrong. No, you don't know what you're talking about. We're psychologists, we know. But on his way back, he goes, for 2 weeks, he goes, he was the happiest ever been. He went, what did the guy do to me? And so he went back, and slowly, psychologists started hanging around this chap and learning from him. And he really saw that what he had seen, his enlightenment experience, really could help people who were, going to see therapists and traditional psychologists and psychiatrists, because it was, he had seen how the mind worked, something that was universal across every single person. And so in my book, I really focus on, one of those principles, which is the principle of thought. And a kind of a shorthand that we use is that everything that we're experiencing, our felt experience of life, right, our feeling state, is a reflection of our thinking moment to moment. And when I mean thinking, that's shorthand for all mental activity.
Okay.
right? And that's what we mean by, you may have heard the term inside out. What we're saying is our experience is generated via our thinking, via our mental activity. And that sounds like maybe a very, innocent statement, but it's super powerful. It has huge, wide reaching implications for people in their lives, in their businesses, because we operate in a world where it looks to us like our feeling state has got at least something to do with stuff happening, the
Right.
economy, right? The situation, the time of day, right? Like so many different things. And the reason I wrote my book is, look, there are colleagues of mine who have written books about the three principles. They probably explain it better than I do. But what I saw was there was a gap, and the gap was people weren't really seeing the implications of this seemingly innocent statement about our feeling state, right? They're like, okay, great, so what? But
Hmm.
it actually has huge, wide-reaching implications. Like when I speak to business owners, and they may be looking for advice, quite often they know what the next step is for their business. They know already what it is that they need to do, or that they should be doing, or
For
that
sure.
they could be doing, right? It's not a lack of information. So when we dive into that a little bit more and go, well, what's going on? It's normally because there's some feelings coming up, right? Like that feels uncomfortable, that feels scary. I don't want to put myself out there, right? There can be fear of rejection for
Hmm.
making proposals, or whatever. And people interpret those feelings of fear, of insecurity, of anxiety as, don't go and do that, as
Right.
opposed to, no, that's just what you're thinking in that moment. And you don't always think that. It doesn't happen all the time. And it's not something that, that's not a good reflection, right? And I use tons of examples because, for anyone that's worked a job, and maybe even for business owners, right? I'll say, if I'm talking to an audience, I'll say, how many times has it happened in your life that you wake up in the morning and you don't want to go to work, right? Has it ever happened? And everyone go, yeah, like it's happened at least once. You'll have the day you wake, I can't be bothered to go into work.
Sure.
And I ask the audience, okay, how many times have you therefore stayed in bed all day, right? And most people will say never, right?
Right.
And I'm like, well, why not? Why do you ignore? And they know on some level that their feeling in that moment is not something they need to listen to,
Mm.
right? They just
Right.
get on with it. And another example is going to the gym. How many people go to the gym regularly, right? How many of you have thought about, oh, I really don't want to go to the gym today,
Yeah.
right? And we go and it's fine. And so we've got all these examples in our own lives of where a thought will come up, it gets reflected as a feeling, and we ignore it, and that turns out to be the right thing to do. And then we've got tons of areas in our life where, again, we know what it is to do, we know what the next step is,
Right.
but a feeling comes up and we're like, oh no, that means something. I shouldn't do this. Maybe I should hold back. Maybe I should, whatever, right? And uncovering that, making that more visible, bringing that into our awareness can be a huge game changer for people. It was a game changer for me, right? In terms of how we, not, like I said, live life, but also, really practical things. How do we run our businesses? And in the coaching world, again, I don't know if you've shared this with your community before, but there's a saying, right? How you do anything is how you do everything,
Right. Sure.
right? And this understanding, it applies to not only how you running your business, but how are you showing up, as a man? How are you showing up in your marriage? How are you showing up as a father, right? Because it's everywhere.
Right.
And what I find with my clients is they may come to me for one thing, and we start working on that, but then they'll start telling me, oh, by the way, you know what, my marriage has improved, or I'm really enjoying my kids. I'm
Yeah.
spending more time with my kids, like, yeah, we kind of, I'm making more money. Yeah, that was great. That's what I hired you for. But this other stuff's happening. I don't know if that's got anything to do with what we're talking about, but I'm just letting you know. I'm like, yeah, it does. It's got everything to do with it.
For sure. So a couple things. One is you were talking about Sydney Banks, who had this enlightenment, had this moment. I think it's interesting. correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't he a welder?
He was a welder, yes. He worked in a mill off the west coast of Canada.
So he was a tradesperson working with his hands and working with a developed skill. And we sometimes think that people in the trades may not be deep thinkers or seek enlightenment, which is just, that's more thinking and more, judgment, whatever. But I find it interesting and applicable to my world, because I work with a lot of folks that have more blue collarish businesses, or we grew up, I grew up, my grandfather was a coal miner, so I was around blue collar trades people all the time. So I think that's neat that Sid Banks was a welder, and he was, I don't know the whole story, but that he was enlightened and had a new way of seeing the world and seeing his life and his place in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, he's a really great role model. And he used to say, like, don't make it about me. It's not about me. But he's a great role model because he was just an ordinary guy. He didn't go to India. He didn't go around studying, tons and tons of books and articles. He didn't meditate under a tree, for decades. He was just an ordinary, and he was originally from Scotland. He was this Scottish guy, right?
A chap. I like that word. Use chap.
Right? So he was just very ordinary, just a normal, as we'd say in England, a normal bloke, right? So and he was convinced that what he'd seen can help ordinary people. It wasn't like, okay, now you need to go on this long journey. It was just like really practical, down to earth, like common sense. Right? That's kind of what he was pointing to.
Yeah, and so common sense and so simple, yet it could have such far-reaching impacts and effects inside and outside in our world. And I think we're all ordinary. I've been thinking about a lot with my people that I work with. Most of us are not going to be building a startup like Facebook or Uber or something, and they're just ordinary people too. Like we're all ordinary after all. But it is good to identify with this isn't a person who went out to go seek this knowledge. It came to them, and it's available for all of us. So what I hear you saying is that there's like, if I separate this a bit, there's thought, there's mental activity, any mental activity. I like the way you just cooked that down for me. And then there's feelings that I know what feelings are. And then there's my actions, and the three can be different. They don't all blend together all the time.
So the mental activity and the feeling, that's kind of two sides of the same coin.
Okay.
Right? So the feeling is reflected as the mental activity kind of is the other side of the coin. It's a reflection, one of the other, right? Yeah. The gap then is like, what do we do with that information? And you're right. So a lot of people take action not based on the feeling, but an interpretation of the feeling.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. So a feeling comes up of, oh no, what am I doing in my business? I can't handle this. I can't turn this around. I'm a loser, whatever. Or, I find a lot of men that I work with secretly judge themselves pretty harshly. It's not something they talk about. It's not something they'd say openly, but in conversations, I'll kind of open up and say they really think quite badly of themselves because of some thinking they have. And one of the things I help point out to them is, just because you've got some thinking about yourself has got nothing to do with who you are. It's got nothing to do with you mentioned Steve Chandler. Steve and I recorded this short clip once about this distinction, worthy versus useful, right? And one of the things we talked about was, how do you know that you're worthy, right? Like, how can you measure that? Give me the measurement that shows you, like, what's your scale, like 1 to 10? Are you a 10 worthy? You will never know. You just have a feeling and you put an interpretation on the feeling, but that's got nothing to do with anything, right? And that doesn't just apply to worthiness, that applies to kind of everything, right? There's a lot of things like confidence. We sometimes talk about confidence as a fixed thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not. I can feel really confident in an area where I'm competent, right? And I might not feel confident in an area where I'm not competent. But also, sometimes I can have false confidence. I can be very confident in an area where maybe I should be a little bit more held back. And there's other areas where I don't feel confident, but it's unwarranted. So all of these things are concepts, right? But we kind of we like putting things in boxes,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And that really creates our experience of the world far more than we realize, right? And if we take all of that stuff out, right, like again, one thing Steve talks about, as I'm sure you know, is kind of like the robot. If we were robots and we had all the information we have, but we just we took the feelings out of the way, we just get so much more done. And it's not that feelings are a problem, it's that we're interpreting our feelings incorrectly. And in my book, I call these misunderstandings. We've just got misunderstandings left, right, and center,
Mm-hmm.
which get in the way of us performing more effectively, which get in the way of us making more money, which get in the way of us growing our businesses, right? And I'm talking to myself as much as I'm talking to everyone else listening to this.
Right. Always. There's something, I wonder how you would interpret this with these concepts. I read something in a men's Facebook group, and it was a member of the group was telling the other people about a 37-year-old man who had been active in this. I'm not in it enough to know, but apparently he had been active in this group, and he was a guy who, had it all. Like he had a beautiful family. He had a successful business, probably would appear, savings, money, so on and so forth, a good beard, which I can't grow. And he had committed suicide. And you were talking about how men have these things going on, but like, we don't talk about it a whole lot. And I know, that's certainly been true for me at times in the past. And then I went through some things that caused me to be more open about it. But certainly it is hard for us to talk about those things. So how do you see something like that? Like somebody who had it all, but clearly there was something going on. How does that fit in with?
Well, one of the things I say to my clients is you can't get enough of what you don't need, right? And often men, we operate in a way where we're trying to get something that we think is gonna make us feel good, or make us feel enough, or make us feel better than someone else, right? And for some men it's money, for some men it's women, for some men it's both, right? It can be, and it can be various things that we're trying to accumulate. And sometimes, the saddest thing is someone gets all that stuff. They get the stuff that they think is going to make them happy, and they still feel incomplete.
Yeah.
And so the only answer is like, right now I'm still feeling like crap, and I've got this, and I've got this, and I've got this. And unfortunately for some of them, they turn to suicide. They turn to like, well, I might as well just end it because I feel so bad inside. And they don't tell anyone because they're living this kind of, fake life where like, hey, look, everything's perfect, right? And we see this on social media all the time, right? Presenting this version of us. I got interviewed a couple of months ago by a men's coach. And he said, so tell me something new and fresh. Tell me what you're learning. And I heard because I recently became a father just at the back end of last year. And I said, man, it's really tough. And he looked at me really surprised because I'm a coach, like I help people. This is what I do for a living. And he kind of expected
it all
me
together.
Right? Like he expected me to come out with like something, really inspiring and motivational. And I went, no, dude, it's tough. It's been really tough. I totally underestimated what it meant to be a dad, and the impact it had not only on my business and my life, but like my relationship with my wife. It totally changed our relationship. And the funny thing is, when I talk to other men about this, anyone else as a father, they go, oh man, me too. Oh yeah, we went through that. It gets better, don't worry, right?
Mhm.
And when I'm talking to men now who are first time fathers, I spoke to a guy recently. He's a first time father. He's kind of a few months after me, and I just I probed. I asked a couple of questions, like and he's going through the exact same thing, and no one tells you, right?
Yeah.
So it's like we don't need to live this kind of persona of like we've got all of our shit together,
Mhm.
right? And everything's perfect, and then like behind the scenes like, oh shit, I haven't got it all together, and then feeling a fraud. It's just that that's life. You have days you feel good, you have days you feel bad, right? Because our thinking changes moment to moment. That's got
Sure.
nothing to do with who we are, or our self-worth. And then the other thing is a lot of people assume, well, if stuff doesn't make me feel good, right? Like if more money isn't gonna make me feel good about myself, right? Or a better wife or a hotter girlfriend or whatever, right? Then they'll say, well, what's the point of getting out of bed, right? Like, what am I doing all this for? And what I've noticed is people assume that they will be less productive, less successful in the kind of material world if they kind of follow the path that I might be pointing them on. But the opposite happens, right? The opposite happens because you get out of your way,
Mm.
right?
And you probably enjoy it more and
You
find fulfillment.
absolutely right. Like just do a thought experiment. Let's take two business owners, right? One of them believes that in order to be, a valid, successful, worthy human being, they need to make as much money as possible, right?
Mhm.
And the other guy uh, is just really happy and comfortable in his own skin, doesn't put too much on it, and just is doing it for fun, right? And like, which one's going to make more money? Or can you see that the one who's having fun can make as much, or if not more money than the other guy, right? And he's less tempted to make short-term decisions that are going to benefit his profitability, but long-term damage his business, right? Like in various businesses, it might be the right thing to say to a customer, we're not going to take your business because we're not right for you. And that lead to much more business for you down the line,
In the long term.
right?
Yep. Well,
And
you bring up a topic that has a lot of energy around it, which is money and things and the pursuit of money. And what I hear you saying I like that there's these two business owners, and one of them all they can think about is the money, the money, the money, and the other one's enjoying the work that they do and working hard, right? But two really different approaches. And one of the things that I've picked up on in your book and then other works that are similar is money too is a really a lot of thought and a lot of feelings and a lot of I can have a lot of misinterpretations and garbage going on around that, can I?
absolutely. I'm working with a business owner at the moment, and I mean she's female, right? So, but it applies just as much to men. And I was
Sure.
speaking to her recently, and it's her and her business partner, and I used to coach her business partner, who is a man, and they've grown their business from nothing, and it's skyrocketed, and they're making more money than either of them anticipated.
Yeah.
But they're working like dogs, right? They're sped up. They're spending no time with their family, right? And and we just had a conversation about it. And what I said to her was like, hey, what are you, did you plan? Did you like? Are you making enough? Like, did you plan? She said, when we set out on our business, we never anticipate even making half of this. We're making more than double what was our highest kind of aspiration.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, so you kind of don't need any more then, right? Like you're making more than double than your highest aspiration. Well, I guess not. No, we don't, right? And I said, why are you doing this for? And she said, well, to provide for my family and for my kids and to have a good life. And I went, right. And how much time are you spending with them? And she went, no, I'm working all the time, right? And so we talked about, well, you don't need to do that, right? But not that that will make her less money. I'm like, if you start taking more time out for yourself, right, will you be better placed to deliver a better service for your clients? She said, yeah. I mean, it's obvious, right? It makes sense. I said, also, if you take some more time out, does that mean you can turn away some business because you've got less time, right? You can turn away the business you don't really want, right? Does that make you more desirable to work with or less? And she went, well, I guess more actually. I'll be more exclusive. And so we talked about, it's like, it's not an either or, it's a win-win. She can
Right.
have more time for her family. She can have a better sense of well-being, and she can make more money and work with the kind of client she really wants to work with, rather than being, but this all stems from misunderstandings, right? This stems from thinking, I can't let any money go. Money is really important. It's scarce, and I've got to hold on to every single client, which is just not true.
Well, and it goes back. There's something you said about, and I've heard this come up with people I work with, and it certainly comes up for me. Is it's like a fear that if I'm not under stress and driving, then I'll lose my edge, and then I'll become complacent. That's a word that comes up a lot. Then I'll become complacent, and then everything will like all crash down around me, and it'll all be done. It's easy to get on that thought train and have a hard time getting off of it.
Right. And I always just say to people, don't trust me. Why would you trust me? It's your business, right? The buck stops with you. Test it. Test it for yourself. And what I found is everyone that tests it, it's not about me trying to convince them. They see it for themselves. I see it for myself in my business. When I'm running at 100 miles an hour, I'm not doing that much better. I can sometimes make money in the short run, but there's always a trade-off, and other parts of my life suffer. And on the flip side, the more that I'm slowed down, right, and the more I kind of realize, hey, it's all this stuff is not that important. It's a game. I can treat it like a game. I relax, right? I get clearer in terms of where to spend my time in my business, and I make more money and I enjoy myself better.
You just said it's a game. I really like that. Like that I can attach to, and I think some of the people who will listen to that can attach, can work with that and use that. It's funny, whenever I work with somebody who's very mindful, I like start watching my words, and I'm like almost, not for the sake of I don't want to say the wrong thing to you, but I become more aware of, oh, there's thinking going on, and there's like judgments of myself and others going on. But the idea of a game, like life is a game, having a business is a game. It's a fun game to play. I get to get up, I this is one of those things I've caught myself and corrected and worked through. I used to say, I have to go see Bill. I would leave home and I would tell my wife, I have to go see Bill today. I have to go see this client today. And I've started to say, that may come out, but then I'll fix it and say, I get to go see them today. And that's the game. That's like the game I choose to play. And it's fun, and building businesses is fun. And it's like creating a form of art. It's not this like heavy, if it's a heavy burden, it just doesn't, that I must do, it doesn't go so well. So thanks for that. Playing a game.
Yeah. And the thing is with seeing it as a game, this isn't semantics, right? This isn't like, hey, see it like a game, and you're like, yeah, but I've got the bills to pay, Wayne, right? Mm-hmm. I've got bills to pay, Kush. This is like on a psychological level. If you see, look, if you make $1 million this year, or you make $1,000 this year, right? That has no impact on your feeling state. You can make $1 million a year and be stressed out, unhappy, have a terrible relationship, no, great relationship with your kid. Like everything can be falling to crap on the inside, right? And you can make like $1,000 this year, and everything can be going great. Now, I'm not saying therefore make 1,000. I'm saying there's no correlation, right? Sure. Or there's no causation there. And so when you see, and I see this for myself, right? Like I want to grow my business, on the level of the business. But when I step back and say, look, whatever the business does, I'm okay, because my feelings aren't related to how well the business does, then I really get to see it as a game.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And do you guys play, do you guys have a game over there, like a board game called Monopoly?
Yeah, sure.
Right. It's like a famous board game. We
Yeah.
used to play this as
Go buy
kids.
hotels or properties and build houses and hotels. Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So everyone's played Monopoly with the kid who gets pissed off and throws all the thing because they
Right.
take it too seriously. Right. And we do that in life. We all become that kid that we like take our businesses so seriously because it looks to us like the outcome is so important to how we feel. The outcome is really important. Right. And when we realize kind of what I'm pointing to, which is you're just feeling your mental activity just moment to moment, we get to relax and see it like it is a game. And the more we see it as a game, the paradox is we play it more successfully, right? And I've seen clients of mine who get this, they start getting promoted at work, the businesses start making more money. Like it's not a case of, be poor and happy. You don't want to be rich and unhappy. No, it's like there's no correlation.
You use a phrase, they get that. The clients, they get that. And what it feels like in my experience has been working with people and for myself, I can get that in a moment, and my clients can get that, whatever that is, in a moment. They can just all of a sudden see things differently, and then everything goes better. And as a coach, working with people and facilitating mastermind groups, having grown up in like a blue collar world with a coal mining grandfather, sometimes it almost seems too easy. Like the work, I feel that, oh, this coaching stuff, like maybe it's too easy. Maybe I need to make it harder. Maybe I need to work harder and do more to be worthy of my grandfather's approval or something. Like we could go down, roughly what it feels like. But it really is like, it's really hard to change or have insights or to get that. And yet it's really easy and can happen in a moment. And it also could be like, it can be moment to moment too, can it? Sometimes like I can choose to see it and then I can choose to ignore it and be miserable for a while. And then I could see it again. Does that make sense? It comes and goes.
Oh yeah. Like I don't want to give anyone the wrong impression that like, oh, I live like this all the time and I get it. Like I see it and then I lose sight of it. Right. But for me, this is very much a journey. And the longer I've been, exploring this, the easier it is for me to kind of bounce out of it when I don't see it. And the
Sure.
easier it is that I stay in it. And, one of the things, I mean, I'm sure it's the same, with you, the work you do, you can have a conversation with someone for half an hour and they can see something that can change their whole business. But it's also very different when someone works with you over a period of time that you really get to go deep and they see other things. It's not one's right or the other. It's different. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing. Like people can listen to this, have an insight from it, see something different and show up differently. And that's all good. But that's also different from, diving deeper. Now, for me, I do this professionally. So I've dived in deep for 8 years and I've traveled all around the world and I've read tons of stuff about it and I do courses and I get mentored and whatever. Most people don't need to do that to that level of detail. But what I also say to people is, if you're interested, go and explore this for yourself in whatever way makes sense to you, because then you'll see it for yourself. And there's like levels of depth. And so I've got a client of mine from Europe who I've been working with for 5 years. And the reason we're working together for 5 years is not because it's taken 5 years for him to see what it is that he originally came to see me for. Sure. Right. It's like that has evolved over time. And for me, it's like the book could be called a book of implications. And I keep seeing more implications of this in my own life and in the lives of my clients.
Yeah. That makes sense. So one, I want to ask you at least one question from the book and then tie in how people can get a hold of you and reach out. but another one more question comes up, and that is a lot of the way you said it, like you don't have to go that deep, but you can. This separating like who I am from thought, feelings. You said it's two sides of the same coin, and then seeing how action doesn't necessarily, I can make choices, doesn't have to follow my feelings, and it can be moment to moment how I look at things and whether it's a game or not. I get those things. A lot of my clients are business owners with either, I have one that has 100 employees, and then so they have a team of managers. So everybody is maybe aware of all 100 employees, but most directly involved with a smaller group of 5 to 10 people that they coach, and they're coaching and they're working with their teams. And or I have small business owners who maybe have 3 employees total, but we all get a chance to, once we see this and start separating like who we are is not necessarily our thinking and feelings, and there's choices, then I think we start seeing it in other people and those folks that we work with directly. And we have to, we can't unsee it. But I have to be careful with how I talk to them about it initially, because if they haven't thought about it themselves and been on the journey, that's thinking, like you're just thinking about that. And I've been guilty of doing this, like, with my wife, where, I say things like, it's a choice whether you're offended or not. And she doesn't like that so much. Brilliant, right? Yeah. So don't say that. Don't say that. How could an employer work with a couple of key people to try to get them to just see a little bit of this and start down the path?
Well, you know what? It's about seeing it for yourself, right? So what I find is it's almost like a process. Someone I work with, they start seeing it for themselves, and at the beginning, it happens a lot. They turn into a bit of an evangelist. Hey, that's just your thinking. That's just your thinking. And generally people around them don't like that very much, right? And often they'll come back to me and say, hey, I went and told so-and-so it's their thinking. They didn't appreciate that,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yeah, I'm not surprised. Because when we start to really see that our experience of life is created via thinking, and so is everyone else's, we also see that it looks really real to us, right? Like, this is why, we're astounded by magicians, right? Or illusionists. Like, they do stuff which just looks real, and we're like, how on earth did they do that? So if someone comes along, like if you're really upset with your wife, right, because she said something, it looks, and the moment, now afterwards, after a while, when your mind settled down, maybe you'd reflect on it and you go, you know what, yeah, maybe I overreacted to that. But in the moment, if you're upset, that's real to you, right, in the moment. So it really looks like it was down to what she said. Now, especially if it's her who comes back and says, well, this has got nothing to do with me, you're upset, you can't hear that, right? So this understanding has given me a lot more compassion for people, right? Including my wife, including, my clients, including, my friends, anyone. And so if you're an employer and you've got people who are struggling, I mean, the first step is just acknowledging that their reality looks really real to them.
And a lot of times what comes out is they're blaming outside circumstances for why they didn't get something done, or in sales, the reason they didn't make more telephone calls is because somebody rejected them and it really felt terrible. Those are like ways that I can think of that it
right
have practical applications.
Right. And it's not even the words. I find it's more about where you're coming from. Like, some people think I'm this very soft, gentle coach, but the people who have been working with me know that I can be really direct, right? And I find that I can kind of get away with saying certain things to my clients, mm-hmm, more because of where I'm coming from. It's like, I care about you, therefore I can ask you, are you really full of shit right now?
And they do feel that. They can, right, feel that you care. They certainly pick up on that vibe.
Right. And this is the same for employers. Whereas if you don't have that same come from, right? If you don't have that same place that you're coming from and you say to an employee, are you full of shit right now? They're going to be really upset, most likely, right? It's probably not going to go down well. So it's more about like, are you coming from a place where you see that your employee is struggling, you really care for them and you want the best for them, right? And then you're going to have then you're going to find your own words, and you can explore this together. Like someone says, well, I couldn't make the sales calls because of this and this, and you might just, I don't know, in the moment you might just say, well, do you really see that? Does that look really true to you? And the employee might go, yeah, it looks really true to me. Okay. And then you can start exploring that. Go, okay, well, tell me more about that. And how do you explain that your colleague seemed to have made the calls, right? And you weren't able to do it?
Or we go right back to the beginning where you said, has anybody ever felt like not getting out of bed and going to work in the morning?
Right.
And there's an example of, we know how to do it. We know how to push through that. So we just need to apply it over here. I want to ask you one question from the book, because I think it helps illustrate practically how this works with something that we all deal with. And the chapter title is called Anger and Road Rage. And so most of us have had the experience of some a-hole, cutting us off in traffic and getting fired up, and we all have different reactions to that. But that's a great way to start thinking about the separation, I think, of thoughts, feelings. Can you just talk about that for a moment? Anger and road rage.
Yeah, I used to get road rage all the time. I mean, not badly. I didn't get out of my car and start beating people up, but I used to get really upset about other drivers and like, for God, does he not know how to drive? Are you blind? Right? And like every day, at least once or twice a day, I would get really angry driving in my car somewhere, and I didn't even realize it. And it looked to me like that was out of my control. Like I was getting angry because of the other driver.
Right.
And then as I started learning this stuff, I started realizing like, no, the anger doesn't have anything to do with the driver. Like the other driver does something, I have some thinking about what they've done, and that gets reflected. Some angry thinking gets reflected as anger in the moment. And the more I started to be open to that fact that, oh, it's my angry thinking, I kind of snapped out of it. I calmed down. And there's like, again, different thought experiments you can do to prove this to yourself. Like one of them is, imagine someone's cut you off in traffic, right? And you're like super angry, and then you realize it's your best mate.
Right.
Like you would immediately, or most likely, you dissipate your anger, and you're like, oh, you asshole, right? Yeah. Whatever, or it's your mom, right? Or your dad, like, or whoever, right? You can do these thought experiments with yourself and show that the same action could happen, but if we change one or two bits of information, you'd interpret that whole situation differently. Yeah. Right? And there's so many examples of where certainly in the UK, people do crazy things in road rage incidents. They get out of their car, they smash a window,
Here too.
right? They do all sorts of crazy stuff, and then they go to court over it, and they're ending up in front of a judge, and they're like, they've never had any prior convictions, they're a model citizen, nothing ever. And when they ask them like, hey, what happened? He's like, I don't know what came over me. Right? And there is this separation between our feeling state and who we are. Mm-hmm. And now all it takes is, I've got a colleague of mine who works in prisons in the US, and she says the only difference between her and these like it's a real high security prison. Right. The difference between her and the prisoners, the only difference is they've acted on their thinking and she doesn't. Right? Sure. And especially when I'm with men, sometimes I'll ask a question. I'll say, how many people have ever had the thought about murdering someone? Right? Generally with men, most people put their hand up. At least once in your life, you've had a murderous thought. And I'm presuming, unless you're on the run or you've come out of jail, most people, I'm presuming most of you haven't acted on that thought. And they're like, yeah, we haven't, we've never killed anyone. So everybody knows on some level with certain things, not to act on their thinking, not to take their anger seriously. And something that might even be road rage. But there's areas of our life where we don't see that. Right? And if we didn't see it ever, we would be in the loony bin.
Hmm.
right? Like we would be locked away for our own good if we never saw the difference. And in fact, there's some, I remember having a guy at one of my men's retreats who was like, he was a giant, right? And this guy had come out of prison, and I started questioning, like, is this a good thing to have this guy here, right?
Sure.
But he'd done a training program in the three principles, and it turned his life around. And he spoke for 2 hours. It was amazing. But one thing he said was, I used to live my life that if I had a thought, I needed to act on it. So he said, if I had a thought, oh, I need to go and rob that petrol station or gas station, as you guys would call it, he
Yeah,
would
yeah.
do it. If it was like, I need to hit that person, he would hit them. And so his life was terrible because he ended up in prison many times over. Now, I'm guessing most of the people listening to this don't do that, and therefore, are not in prison. But there
Right.
are areas of our life where we have a thought and we act on it as if it's true, right? Your spouse says something and you're like, oh, that hits my button. I now need to defend myself or walk out or, you know, say some choice words or whatever, right? Or, you know, for me, it was like emails. I get an email from a colleague and it was like, you effing da da da.
Especially if
And I
it's in
would
all
just,
caps, right?
right? Like, but it's not nothing. And this, I say this as men gives us our power back,
Mm.
right? Because then no one like you become much stronger, more powerful because no one has the ability to put feelings in you. You start seeing it self-generated.
That's great. So we're getting close to the end of time, and I want to be respectful of that because it's been wonderful. And I know I've benefited just by the conversation. So kind of selfishly, thank you for coming. Um, I you run some men's retreats in the UK where you like run a castle, and of course, right now we're not doing as much traveling, but we will again. And you do these immersive retreats. I think it'd be so cool if one of my guys, flew to Europe and went to a castle with you and like you got to have an experience like what you're describing with the gentleman who came and shared about how things had changed after studying the three principles. So we're going to stay connected, and I want to connect my community with you. How can people reach out to you? Is there anything that you want to share that I should attach in show notes and stuff, etc.?
So the best way for people to get hold of me is via my website, which is Ankush Jain, ANKUSHJAIN.co.uk. And at the moment, there's a bit you can click on, which is men, and there's a bunch of videos where I'm coaching men. So if people are interested and they want to see more of that, they can do that.
Okay, that's awesome. Thanks. Well, on ankushjain.co.uk.
Correct.
Very good. Thanks so much, Ankush.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right.